Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Alexandria and Angie here with Navigate HCR. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're glad to have all of you on. Hopefully we've got quite a few returning people, so nice to see you all again. Wanted to start today. We have a new little picture of us for everybody to take a gander at. Just wanted to kind of catch you guys up as to what's going on. I think today is going to be a big Q&A. If you have any questions, please let us know in the Q&A chat box, which is located in your upper right-hand corner. And we're going to go ahead and get started for the day. So here we go. So here's a couple things we're going to go over. We're going to talk about some of the additional guidance that was released from the FFCRA. And then, of course, we'll go through questions and review some resources. And, of course, you guys are always open to contact us, so we like to share that information again for you. If you are not aware, Navigate HCR, we are a full-service compliance consulting firm and technology company. Our goal of our human resources and compliance team is really to build and maintain partnerships with all of you people out there and be a valued resource for you through all of the crazy times. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring Miss Angie Sura on the line and have her chat about what's happening. Go ahead, Angie.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here again today to pull out some additional guidance that we have seen with regarding the FFCRA, Families First Coronavirus Response Act. As I've mentioned several times in our past webinars, this legislation was passed so very quickly. They're still coming out with more and more guidance and examples. So if you haven't, be sure to jump out on dol.gov website, click on their coronavirus link, and keep an eye on the new Q&As that are available. It seems they are adding them very, very frequently. So I wanted to pull out a couple of interesting pieces that I have found, and really, I do this kind of research based on the different types of questions that we're being asked, whether they're from our partners or clients or, based on the webinars that we're doing. So the one question we've had is about paid leave under the FFCRA due to quarantine or isolation order, including shelter in place or stay-at-home orders. So I wanted to break down really what this means. I know that you're going to have employees questioning you that, okay, well, there's a stay-at-home order in place. I want to get paid for, this emergency paid leave. But really, you have to quantify and qualify whether or not, they're eligible to actually take that leave. So let's take a look at this. So a quarantine or isolation order includes quarantine, isolation, containment, shelter in place, or stay-at-home orders issued by any federal, state, or local government authority. But there's an important caveat here. The order must cause the employee to be unable to work or telework, even though his or her employer has work that the employee could perform, but can't because of the order. The rule states that this includes when a federal, state, or local government orders or advises categories of citizens, those in certain age ranges or certain medical conditions, to shelter in place, stay at home, isolate, or quarantine, causing those categories of employees to be unable to work or telework. Now, to break this down and disseminate it a little bit, so there are some indicators in the guidance and a variety of other sources that I have read or gone to that talk about, if the employee can't go into their place of employment, or if the employee is unable to telework. So for example, you may have a business or in an industry that telework just isn't possible. You may have some clerical staff that can telework, but for example, you are in a manufacturing facility and your general laborers are required to be in there to perform a function or operate a piece of equipment or machinery. Now, obviously, they can't telework. So that's a great situation where they could apply for these benefits under you, the employer. Now, the other piece of this that I wanted to talk through a bit is your employees may, in some instances, have the ability to telework, but then there's the question, do you have work for them to do in a telework type of capacity? So, as I've said numerous times in our various webinars, it's very, very important to look at every single request as an individual situation per employee. You've really got to dig in to, what they're asking for. What reason are they looking to apply under? And then really dig down through the variety of questions to determine if it's truly applicable for them. I know a lot of employees are making some assumptions about these new rules. So it's really your job as the employer to make sure that if you're providing them that leave, that you're following the rules and regulations, going through a checklist of some sort, because again, at the end of the day, you want to make sure you have everything documented. This is not as simple as allowing them to utilize this, but in order for you to obtain tax credits, you really have to have all of your documentation in order. Alex, let's go to the next one. So here's another example. I pulled out the stay-at-home order as an example. So an open for business essential manufacturer that has work available for its employees has an employee call and say, I'm taking my 80 hours of paid sick leave per the state stay-at-home order. And we all know there are a variety of states that have enacted this stay-at-home order. Keep in mind, if you're an essential business and each state has posted on their website what the business types and industry types are considered essential. So always make sure you know where you fall in the essential versus non-essential category. Under the order, employees are expressly permitted to travel to and from their homes to work at an essential business. So the order is not the cause of the employee not being able to work. The cause is, perhaps the employee is misinterpreting what the stay-at-home order means. So again, this is just another kind of example of how you really have to dig into every single situation. And starting with, are you an essential business defined by your state, or are you not essential? So sometimes we have to go all the way back to the basics to try to determine the proper answer. And again, it's every employee that comes to you requesting leave, you're going to have to go through this type of process to really, make sure you're qualifying them as eligible or not. Alex, go ahead to the next one. So these are some questions that I wanted to post out here, and mainly because I know you guys are all receiving copies of the slide deck when we're done, and this will be a good reference for you to jump back to. So these are some questions that always need to be answered yes for the employee to be eligible for the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. That the order or advice was issued on or after April 1st. So again, we all know, despite the fact the law was signed by the president on March 18th, it didn't become truly enforced till April 1st. Was the employee working or teleworking prior to. The employee falls within a category of people to whom the order or advice was directed. And 4, the order or advice now renders the employee unable to perform the work or telework that he or she was previously able to do. So we're going to go through a few of these kind of qualifying bullet points so that this will be an easy reference for you guys to come back to at any time once this presentation is over and we send you the slide deck. It'll be a good piece to kind of pull these out and keep them aside anytime you've got employees coming to you. Let's go ahead to the next one, Alex. So let's talk about when an employee notifies you of their need to take leave due to the closure of a child's school or unavailability of a child care provider. What you're going to need to verify is that the child or children in question meet the rules definition. The employee attests that no other suitable person is available to care for the son or daughter during the requested period of leave, and the employee isn't able to telework and perform such work that the employer has available. Now, this is a pretty key one because I've had questions, you know, where I have a situation, the employee is requesting leave because of, you know, the child's situation with school, but the other parent, so the spouse of your employee, is already at home, or you know, really it's looking at the concept of, you know, if there are two parents in the household, are both of them looking to take off from their respective employers, if they work for two different employers or if they work for the same employer. So this is kind of an interesting one. I mean, this is some guidance that we've seen. Now, how you would, as an employer, try to prove otherwise that, well, you know, your spouse is home and available. You know, I think that's going to be really difficult to try to deny an employee leave for that, because again, it's difficult to prove. But they do put that in the guidance. And then again, whether the employee is able to telework or not and perform the type of work that they would normally do if they were in your physical place of business. So 3 interesting key things to look into. Alex, go ahead and go to the next one. So we talked about the concept of the word individual, either last webinar or the one before, I'm not sure which. And even though when the text of the bill was first written, it had the words family member as opposed to individual. It was when they passed it and we got to see the final text as it was signed into law, they changed that word to individual. Well, there is a great 32-page, not too horrible, piece out on govinfo.gov that really is designed to break all of this law down into some additional guidance, which I think is helpful. And I've read through that and, you know, used quite a bit of that in my presentations. So the concept of an individual, we talked about last time that there has to be some sort of relationship. So the guidance is breaking it down even further into who is an individual. So let's take a look at that. Obviously, an immediate family member. That's going to be a great resource as an individual. You can always assume an immediate family member is going to be included. The other one would be a person who regularly resides in the employee's home. So for example, you may have one of your parents living at home with you, someone that you're, now taking care of in their, older ages. A person with whom the employee has a relationship that creates an expectation that the employee would care for the person if he or she were quarantined or self-quarantined. So, you know, what are we talking about here? Could be your significant other that you're not necessarily married to and don't live in the same household with. You know, it could be your child who is a grown adult and lives elsewhere. You know, so there's a variety of things, and I still think this leaves open a bit of interpretation. You know, and certainly if I wanted to claim that I need to care for my neighbor, who I have no blood relation to or familial relation to, and I want to care for them in the event they become ill, for example, I would have, as an employee, I would have to go quite a ways to prove what that relationship is. You know, have I for years and years and years lived beside this person, and you know, I'm always the one that is there to care for them. Perhaps they don't have any children. You know, I don't know. There are definitely some areas where this is still a little vague, but wanted to throw those out there. Now, before we dive into the next one, I just want to peek. I see we have a question. I'm going to go ahead and address that because the next piece is going to be in a little bit of a different context. So, Alex, I'll go ahead and do this job for you. If an employee is able to telecommute, however, due to childcare issues, can only work 4 of the 8 scheduled hours. Can the employee work the 4, then receive 4 hours of the EFMLA hours? That's a great question. In the guidance that I've seen from multiple sources, including the Department of Labor resources, is that it's really up to the employer and the employee to kind of come to an agreement or an understanding of whether or not you know, it's possible to do a bit of like intermittent type of leave. And we've had multiple questions from a variety of folks asking about, well, can they do this intermittently? Because sure, there could be a situation where, you know, spouses are kind of doing, you know, I'll do half the week of taking care of the kids, you do half the week, you know what I mean? Because we all have to work, and yet having young kids home, there's certainly the added responsibility of making sure they're doing their virtual schoolwork and all of that good stuff. So it really is a matter of, can the employer document legitimate reasons why that this would need to happen? So let's say, for example, part of that employee's job is to be on the phone all day. Let's say they're a telemarketer. So they're constantly on the phone. It is going to be very difficult to do the job they're required to do for a full 8 hours a day from 9 to 5 if they have to deal with, you know, young kids running around and, you know, helping them with schoolwork and things like that. So that's something that really needs to be documented per employee based on what their job description looks like, and you know what type of work you're giving them to do in a telework capacity. Now, the other situation is if it's not a situation where they have to work 9 to 5, no exceptions, and you can be accommodating with them and say, okay, you know, I need to get your 7-8 hours of work in, but I understand if you need to start earlier than your normal workday would be, take some time off in the middle to, you know, handle the kids' schoolwork or whatever requirements they have, and then you work more late afternoon, early evening. So, you know, it's a matter of what is their job that they need to be performing. Does it have to be during a specific time period of a workday? You know, are there accommodations that you can make so they can truly work their, you know, work the hours they need to work to get paid by you, the employer, versus using the emergency FMLA? And the only reason I throw those kind of things out there is my fear would be, what if, 3 or 4 months down the road, they actually end up with a true serious illness for themselves or one of their family member unrelated to coronavirus. Remember, the emergency or the FMLA expansion doesn't give them 12 additional weeks. So if they use some of that time now, when they may not necessarily need to actually use that time now, it's going to limit if they have a situation later that would fall under traditional FMLA. So I would say employers, use your best judgment. What you decide to do, always make sure, one, you're documenting the reasons why, that you're not being discriminatory against any particular employee type, employee class, or any of that, and that you're, doing the same for everybody similarly situated. All right, I hope that answers that. Alex, let's go ahead to the next one. So I've got 6 great pieces on this next slide. This is going to be a good one to print and hang on to. What can you, the employer, request from the employee? Now, this is going to go toward documentation. So what can you request that the employee provide when they're asking to take either the emergency paid sick leave or the FMLA expansion? Now, there hasn't been any change that I've seen yet for the traditional WH FMLA forms. I know we have provided those that asked a kind of an updated type of FMLA request form as a template to use. But these 6 pieces are going to be really important to make sure you're collecting for every single employee when they come to you and ask to take either the EPSL or the FMLA expansion, or both. So obviously the employee's name, the date for which the leave is requested, and what is their qualifying reason. So remember, with the emergency paid sick leave, there are 6 reasons. With the FMLA expansion, there's 1. So you want to document all of that. And the other thing I would add there, what's the date they requested it of you? Second piece, the name of the government entity that issued the COVID-19 related quarantine or isolation order that applies to the employee, or the name of the healthcare provider who advised the employee to self-quarantine due to COVID-19 related concerns, or the name of the government entity that issued the quarantine or isolation order for the person being cared for, including the name of the person who your employee needs to be off to care for, and what the relationship is, or the name of the healthcare provider who advised the individual being cared for to self-quarantine. So this would be for the emergency paid sick leave, so if they're going to care for another person, and the name of the person, again, who's being cared for, and what the relationship is. And then finally, the name of the son or daughter being cared for, the son or daughter's age, the name of their school or place of childcare that's closed or unavailable due to coronavirus related reasons. So this is 6 great points to make sure that you are documenting for every single request. Now, most likely, I'm going to take the recent template that we converted for the FMLA piece, and we're going to incorporate all of these additional pieces to it. Just so, as we can evolve that sample template, the better. I'm going to keep doing that. All right, let's go to the next one. So we've had lots and lots of questions about the under 50 employees small business exemption. You know, there's truly not a ton of guidance, but there is a little bit of guidance, and we're going to dig into a bit more on the next slide, but let's go through this one as far as that small business exemption. So for the exemption, we're looking at paid sick leave due to school or place of care closures or child care provider unavailable for COVID-19 reasons, expanded FMLA due to school or place of care closures or child care provider unavailability. So I wanted to pull these two particular pieces out because when it comes to the additional guidance, which again isn't much, coming out about the small business exemption, these are businesses with under 50 employees, it's really only for these two types of situations can you claim an exemption. You don't have to claim the exemption on your entire population. You can claim the exemption for certain employees. It's going to be very critical that if you're not claiming exemption for your entire population of employees and you're only doing it for certain ones, you really, really, really line out, document, and maintain why you chose them. What were their job duties? How could, you know, it be an impact if they were not able to work or telework for you? You want to be very, very clear on that. Let's go ahead to the next slide, and we're going to dig in a little bit more on this exemption. Now, again, there's also no guidance on how you really document that. There's no, you know, there's very little guidance on what you do with that documentation, aside from I have seen in multiple places that you don't have to turn that documentation about the exemption into the Department of Labor yet, but you do need to get it written up and documented and saved. Then for every employee that comes to you asking for leave for those reasons, that you're making a document for each of those employees and why you're exempting them. Okay, so let's continue. A small business may claim this exemption if an authorized officer of the business has determined and must document these next three items. Now, before I get into these three items, I want to point out this. It has to be an authorized officer of the business. If you are the HR supervisor or the vice president who doesn't really have authorization, you want to make sure that even if you're crafting this on behalf of your employer, that your employer reviews it and signs off on it. It's their business. They need to affix their name to that and review that and confirm what you're putting down there is accurate. So here are some things that we need to make sure are being documented. So the provision of paid sick leave or FMLA expansion would result in the small businesses expenses and financial obligations exceeding available business revenue and cause the small business to cease operating at a minimal capacity. So if one of your very key important employees requested this time off, and that you giving that to that employee where they can't telework for you, because again, remember, it can't physically work at your location and cannot telework. So they literally can't do anything for you. Can you document that it would have a financial implication? It would cause an undue burden on you to keep operating at capacity. The second piece that, again, it would entail a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities of the small business because of their specialized skills. knowledge of the business or responsibilities. So for example, you have a small business, less than 50 employees, and your controller, for example, handles all of your payroll, pays all your bills, deals with everything financial in your business, and they are unable to telework for whatever reason. That would be a significant problem if you don't have that controller available to take care of all the financial responsibilities that they have. And then 3, there are not sufficient workers who are able, willing, and qualified, and who will be available at the time and place needed to perform the labor or services provided by the employee or employees requesting paid sick leave or FMLA expansion. So let's keep in mind, as business owners, we often cross-train other employees for in the event something tragic happens, or whatever, that an employee can't come in to do their job, and that's a function that you need to keep the wheels turning in your organization. If truly there isn't someone cross-trained, there's no one there to take up the essential functions that employee did, those are kind of the 3 things you need to watch for when someone is requesting time off and you're under 50 and you're thinking about using that exemption. So 3 things to be really aware of when someone's asking and you're thinking about using that small business exemption. So remember, it doesn't have to be an exemption of your entire workforce. It can be just your key players who perform the most essential functions of your business. Things that if they were not able to do their job, even from home, that it would cause a major problem for your business. So again, at this point, there is no guidance that we need to document it in a specific way. There's no guidance that you have to apply for this exemption online. The guidance I have seen says you don't have to send your documentation to the DOL yet, but definitely don't procrastinate putting that documentation together, because at any time they could come in and ask for it. All right, cool. So it looks like we've got one more question. The question is, can an employee request FFCRA benefits to care for a 16-year-old? Well, that's a great question. And I think before I could answer it, I'd have to ask some follow-up. Is that 16-year-old unable to care for themselves? Is the request because their school is closed? I guess we'd have to really dig in, because traditionally a 16-year-old could probably take care of themselves, take care of their schoolwork, on their own. Is the parent able to be home and telework? You'd have to ask a lot of questions to determine whether that's a yes or no kind of answer. And I could argue in some aspects no, and I could argue in some aspects yes. So this is where it really speaks to a deep dive for every single employee request that you get. Because again, you've got to document that. And failure to do your due diligence or document properly could cause an issue because you're taking tax credits for these. So be very diligent. And as always, don't forget to check out our Q&A site, navigatehcr.answerbase.com. I see I have a bunch of questions out there today that I need to go on and answer for you all, so I'll be updating that this afternoon. We're going to continue to keep that open for some time. Now, the guidance and information that we're getting is definitely getting less and less. as they've done a pretty good job of, kicking out a lot of guidance fairly quickly. So we're going to keep next Tuesday on the calendar, just in case. If for some reason there really is nothing additional to report, we will most likely cancel next Tuesdays, but also hold next Thursday. So we're going to hold kind of one more week. If there's no guidance, we will cancel them so that you can go on about doing other things that you need to do. I certainly don't want to have you come on here if I don't have something super important to talk about. It looks like we've got one more question. If a person is using the COVID sick leave, is it for 2 weeks only or up to 80 hours? That's a good one. And I was just reading up on more of that type of guidance today. So it's 80 hours for 2 weeks. Now, if they only work 20 hours typically in a 2-week period, then they would get 20 hours worth. Can they extend that particular sick leave for many, many weeks to accrue their 80 hours? For a part-time person, no, they couldn't. It's whatever their traditional average number of hours is on a 2-week period or a weekly period. Now, when you're talking about a full-time employee, it's 2 weeks. Can they take that intermittently? They only need a day here this week and a day here next week. I would be hesitant. First, you have to determine, is it something that you want to allow there to be intermittent? That has to be something that you decide as the employer how you're going to handle that. And if you decide we are going to accept intermittent, then you have to accept it across the board for all employees. So, be careful of that. Is it truly I think this is where I'm a little stuck. It's definitely only 2 weeks and only up to 80 hours. But if you're going to allow intermittent, could be a little different story. I could argue that either way. So let me do a bit of a deeper dive on that. I don't want to mislead you or tell you incorrectly. I really think their intent was it's 2 weeks, plain and simple. That's it. Regardless of the number of hours that are needed, it's 2 weeks. But I really think that could be argued either way. So I'm going to hang on to that thought, and we'll get back to you on that. And then, would you explain when the 2/3 of pay comes into play, please? So the 2/3 of pay, remember, is for the second set of reasons with the paid sick leave. So you have 6 reasons. The first 3 are full pay. Reasons 3 through 6 are at 2/3 of their rate. When it's 2/3 of their pay, there's a cap of $200 per day. So essentially you have to look at what is an employee's traditional rate of pay, whether it's salary or hourly. And if it's higher than $200, once you break off into 2/3 of that amount, then you still can only give them the 2/3. All right, I think that's all the questions we have for today. Alex, any final comments or thoughts?
Thanks everybody for joining us. We are glad that you were here. We will make sure to send out a recording as well as some additional documentation. I'll send out the white paper about EPL and EFMLA and how they work together for you guys as well. Also know that we're working on a couple of different resources. I know we sent out a few people the flow chart. We're actually revamping that right now. So as we get those resources that make life a little bit easier for you all, we will definitely share those, and please feel free to share them as well. And if you have any questions, make sure you go to that answer base, let us know, and we'll get to answering all of those for you. And we're glad you're all here, and we'll see you next week. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.